The Department of Public Health and Human Services is pleased to bring you Aging Horizons, Medicare, Social Security, fraud and legal issues, veterans benefits, and caregiving. Aging Horizons is a program dedicated to inform and prepare Montanans on these timely issues, making a difference to you and your loved ones. Here now is today's program host.
Hi folks, today on Aging Horizons, we've got a really special guest with us. Ellen Baumler is here from the Montana Historical Society. Ellen's been a guest with us many times in the past, and she always has really fun, interesting information to share with us. Today we've got some very interesting things that we wouldn't want you to miss even a moment. So, stay tuned.
Clean kitchen surfaces, utensils, and hands with soapy water. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
Click. Click. Click.
The right home care specialist in your area is now easy to find
Click.
with just a click. If you or a loved one require home health care, now there's another tool to help find the right services in your area with the click of a button. It's called Home Health Compare. You can even compare the quality and variety of services available to help make an informed decision. Visit Home Health Compare at Medicare.gov.
You mean I can get help paying my prescription drug premiums?
Let me get this straight. I could be eligible for help with my family's prescription premiums even though I own my own home?
And our assets won't be counted.
If you're a Montana resident enrolled in the Medicare prescription drug program, you could be eligible for help paying your premiums. Call or visit the Big Sky RX website today to find out, even if you think you're over income.
What do you know about that? I'm eligible.
Every generation produces heroes, men and women who step forward to defend our country in time of need, no matter the personal cost to themselves. And though we can never fully repay them, we can make sure they have access to low-cost, long-term care when they need it. That's what Montana's Veterans Homes are all about. If you've got a hero in need in your family, call us. We can help.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Aging Horizons, brought to you by the Department of Public Health and Human Services. I'm your host, Kimmy Everman, and we have a real fun show for you today. One of our favorite guests, Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society, is back with us today, and we're going to talk about what's going on at the Historical Society, what you should all know about, and then a real interesting piece of oral tradition and history that we're going to hear about. So, Ellen, welcome. So glad to have you back.
Thank you.
Now, before we get started, because the story we're going to talk about sounds really interesting to me, and we want to get to it, but we want our audience to also kind of get caught up on what's going on at the Historical Society these days.
Well, we have a lot going on right now. This is our 150th territorial anniversary. It's the 150th anniversary of Helena also, and it is next year in 2015, it will be the 150th anniversary of the Montana Historical Society.
Wow.
Which was founded in 1865. It's one of the oldest organizations of its kind west of the Mississippi, and we're very proud of our heritage. And so in celebration of the territorial anniversary, we have a special exhibit that will be opening May 22nd. And it is sort of, I think, displaying all of the treasures of the Treasure State that, you know, have to do with our heritage and some of the wonderful things that that we safe keep for all the people of Montana.
Can you give us just a couple examples of what might be
my
on?
favorite thing, my most favorite thing is a wonderful tombstone. It's a wooden tombstone that we have that must be taller than I am. And it has a very interesting epitaph on it that's kind of misspelled. And it did come from the city cemetery in Helena, actually. And when that cemetery was removed to build Central School, cool. This tombstone was taken by Wilbur Fisk Sanders and stored in his attic. And he apparently forgot about it. So when the new people bought the house in the 20s, they discovered this tombstone.
That would be a surprise.
Yeah, actually, it's a wooden headboard. It's not really a tombstone.
Yeah.
And so they gave it to the Historical Society, and I think that's probably my most
Your
favorite
favorite
artifact.
Well, and you know, I was thinking as you were explaining, how in the world could a wooden board last all this time, but it was safe in a...
Because it was, Wilbur Sanders and some of the other founders of the Historical Society really had this wonderful foresight and realized that these things would be important to preserve and would help to tell Montana's story.
You know, and that actually brings me to another question, Ellen. We were talking just a little bit about the archives.
Yes.
Why don't you explain to our audience what those are and what's happening in that capacity right now?
That's one of the program areas of the Montana Historical Society. We just mentioned briefly that the others are the State Historic Preservation Office. The museum, of course, is one. Outreach and interpretation is the educational arm, which is what I'm involved in. And then the Research Center. And the Research Center houses not only books, but also archival sources, all kinds of written documents, letters, correspondence, the governor's papers, things like that. It takes up a huge amount of space. And we are, space is at a premium, as you probably are aware, you know. But we were able to get funding for new shelving, which will create taller shelves, which will be more storage for us. But in order to do that, it's been a huge project going back to last fall when they had to remove all of the archives. You can't imagine the work. All of the archives, store them, build the shelves, and put them back. And so
safe keep all those objects at the same time.
Exactly, safe keep all of the paper documents. The Research Center Archives is entrusted with the paper ephemera and paper memorabilia and also books and things like that. So yes.
Well, good luck with that. Because
yes, we're supposed to reopen the 15th of April, I believe, is the target date, and it looks like they're right on target. So yeah.
Well, I was once a volunteer there in the archives, and it was such a special place to get to go every now and then.
It is, yes, it is.
Just because it is so big.
Yes,
and there's
I want
so
to
much.
also mention that the Research Center is still open regular hours. It's just that you can't access the archival resources right now.
Now, Ellen, we just have 2 minutes left in our first segment. Let's just talk a little bit about oral history and how to preserve or process that, because we're going to go into a fun story after this.
Yes, we are. And you know, everybody has a story. You might not think your story is important, but it will be important to somebody sometime. And it's really important for you to get your story told and preserved.
Right.
And one of the things that one of the services that we offer is digital recorders. There's a manual that you can access that will teach you how to do a proper oral history. And then you can check out our digital recorders, and that will create a CD for you. And we only ask that you give one of those to us, and you can make as many copies as you want.
Great.
And it is really a wonderful service, but it is a way that we can grow our oral history collection, which is very, very important part of our archives.
Well, and I think as we did talk about before we got on camera, you don't have to have a log cabin that you were living in. It's anything. We just want to have a record that you were here.
That's right. And you know, that will be important someday to maybe a great grandnephew or maybe a historian of future generations, you know, just wanting to know what was life like for you.
Exactly. Well, folks, we're running out of time here quickly on our first segment, but you know, Ellen is one of my favorite guests, and I'm sure she's one of yours. We've got some very, very fun kinds of stories to tell after this about a lady named Mary Ronan, girl from the Gulches, and I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. So don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Here in Montana, we love our outdoor activities. Unfortunately, few of them are risk-free. Indeed, Montana is second in the nation per capita in head injuries that can destroy the lives of people we love. That's why you should insist your family always wear protective helmets. But you can do even more. When you fill out your vehicle registration this year, circle the Y and donate $1 to support traumatic brain injury prevention and education. Now that's using the old noggin.
The face of the American workforce is changing. People are healthier, living longer, and living better. Baby boomers are a valuable resource for the workplace of today and tomorrow. They're still active and eager to help. Experience, dedication, wisdom, these are just some of the significant assets older workers bring to the job. Age is an asset, experience a benefit.
I don't think a nursing home is a place for anyone when they have a choice of staying in their own home. If you can find people that are willing to help you, you might still be able to stay at home. I wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for people like Johnny. That's what home care is all about. It's having people that are willing to help me. It's just people helping people.
It was a beautiful day. There was about 2 square feet of ice near the door, which I slid on and fell, cracking one rib. And I became somewhat frightening for me to walk outside, particularly in the winter. The Stepping On program came as kind of a surprise to me. I didn't know about it. I've learned the importance of proper balance. I think anybody who has fallen or is afraid of falling would benefit from this program.
Hi folks, welcome back to Aging Horizons. We've been talking with Ellen Baumler from the Montana Historical Society, and we're gonna now talk about somebody pretty interesting in Montana history, Mary Ronan. Ellen, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, you know, we talked about just a tiny bit about Mary Ronan, Girl from the Gulches.
Yes.
Tell us about Mary.
Well, you know, she was an ordinary person, really in extraordinary circumstances, I guess you could put it that way. She was an Irish Catholic girl. When she came to Montana, it was right at the height of the gold rush. She came to Bannock in 1863, and her father was a freighter, and so her father delivered goods to the various mining camps. And, you know, she witnessed all of the changes from the beginning of the territory all the way up until the 20th century.
Wow.
She was there when the vigilantes did their work. She was there when the miners were in their gold rush frenzy, you know, and she was there when her husband was the Indian agent to the Flathead Reservation. She raised her 8 children on the reservation and witnessed, you know, the really sad tragedies that befell the Salish people, the exodus from the Bitterroot Valley and all of that. And, you know, through her reminiscence, we can really live that time period. It's just, it's beautifully written. It's her words. And she's very poetic. She's very Victorian. And her perspectives are Victorian perspectives. But she has such a way of describing things that you really feel like you were there.
So this came from a memoir or a diary that she...
This came from a memoir, yes, and it came about in a very interesting way, actually, which we can talk about in a little bit if you'd like to. But I think, you know, that her story is so important for the 150th anniversary, for the territorial anniversary, because as I said, she was really there and she witnessed all of these things that we read about in the textbooks.
Right.
And so she was in Virginia City, she was in Helena. Her family homesteaded in California, which is also part of the book. And that is an interesting piece of the story, but then she comes back as a bride and comes back
to Montana,
to Helena, and eventually to the Flathead Reservation. And all of the pieces of her story, you know, fit together like a puzzle. And really, it's a way of sort of reliving that time period. I came to the story when I was teaching Montana history And I wanted to find someone's reminiscence that would bring it to life to my students because they were falling asleep, you know. And I really wanted to do something to engage them, and so I cast about for some personal reminiscence. And there's a book called Last Best Place, which is a very, very thick anthology of all types of different pieces of Montana literature. And in that is extracted the one chapter about Virginia City. And I came across her story that way.
Oh.
I read this little chapter about her reminiscence as a 10-year-old in Virginia City, and I thought, I wonder what's the rest of the story. Is there more to this story? And as I looked around, I discovered in the Montana Historical Society Research Center that we had this volume about this thick, typescript on onion skin of Mary's story. And it came to be written because her daughter, Margaret, was a teacher in the Missoula school system, an English teacher. And she decided to pursue a master's in English. H.G. Merriam, who was there at the time, actually that was the very first creative writing program in the United States.
Wow.
In the late 20s and early 30s. And he encouraged her, and she needed a master's thesis. He encouraged her to use her mother's story. And so for a year, Margaret would sit at the typewriter, and Mary would stand behind her and dictate her story.
Wow.
And
we're not talking a computer or electric typewriter
We're not
here.
talking about computers or electric typewriters. Today, you can use a digital recorder, and you don't have to go through all of that.
Right.
But she took down Mary's words, and Mary corrected her every time. She said, that's not what I said. Erase that and put it this way.
Right.
And so that was submitted as a master's thesis.
Wow.
And it really did, you know, as I say, it was a very, very thick master's thesis. And when I came across the rest of that story, I thought, this has to be told. You know, this
I have to share
woman's
this.
story just has to be shared. There was a previous edition of my book, this book, of the thesis. But it was interesting because when Margaret got her master's degree from the U of M, she went back to teaching, became principal of Missoula County High School, but she had a troubled life. And she was apparently had a breakdown, walked into the Missoula River, and never came out. Yes. And so Miriam at the University of Montana was a mentor to many of our important Montana authors, A.B. Guthrie, Dorothy Johnson, just to name a couple.
Great.
And he must have sat on this manuscript until he was 90 years old.
Wow.
And in 1972, when he was 90 years old, he extracted parts of it and published a shortened version of the story.
Wow. That's truly a labor of love when you explain all the everything that went into that. Now we have 20 seconds to the end of this segment. What surprised you most about the story?
Well, I think what surprised me most was the personal aspects and the people that she knew that I've only read about in textbooks.
Awesome.
It was just incredible.
Great. Well, folks, we have a whole lot more to tell you about. This is a really fun story to know about, so stay with us. Questions about Medicare and other types of insurance? Contact the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office to get answers to questions like, what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? And how do you decide if you need Medicare supplemental insurance? This insurance counseling program is not a sales program. It is available to provide answers to your insurance questions. For more information, call the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office at 1-800-332-2272.
If the Aging Network in Montana was a restaurant, the sign out front would say, over 50 million meals served over the last 30 years. Since adequate nutrition is critical to health and quality of life, nutrition services are an important factor in keeping older Montanans healthy, independent, and living in their community and home. To find out more about senior nutrition programs in your area, call 1-800-551-3191.
Are you looking for a helping hand through the maze of human services, or for information on government programs and benefits that you may qualify for? The Information and Assistance Program provides information on all programs that meet our aging population's basic needs and programs that enhance their lives as well as the lives of their families or caregivers. If you have questions about Medicaid, Medicare, or other services and programs, please call 1-800-551-3191.
I didn't know. Montana has one of the highest suicide rates in the country.
Know the signs.
Depression. Isolation. Giving away possessions.
Alcohol abuse.
It's what you can do now that matters.
Don't be afraid to ask. Are you suicidal?
Tell someone.
Don't leave the person alone.
Offer hope. Call the Lifeline.
Don't keep suicide a secret.
Break the silence.
Hi folks, welcome back to Aging Horizons. We've been having a great time today talking about some Montana Historical Society projects and information and just access to a really great part of our state that you should always really think about visiting the Historical Society. Lots of fun and lots of learning there. We have with us Ellen Baumler, and Ellen, it's always such a pleasure to have you here. Now, we've been talking about Mary Ronan, and off camera I said, does that mean is that why we have Ronan, Montana?
Absolutely.
And you said correct.
Her husband,
so
yes.
we'll get that out of the way.
Uh-huh.
But you know, I'm interested in what inspired you to take on this story and want to tell Mary's story and share it.
It was such an inspiring story to me, and I discovered this manuscript, as I said, in the research center, and it was like this thick. And I thought to myself, somebody really has to tell this entire story, but it's not going to be me. But then everyone said to me, well, nobody else is going to do it. Somebody's going to have to do it. And so I'm not a very good typist. I could deal with a computer, but I'm not a very good typist. But I had to get that manuscript into the computer system somehow. And it was huge. My daughter at the time was in 9th grade, and she was going through what a lot of kids go through. I never thought she'd graduate from high school, and she needed a project. And so I said to her, I have this manuscript I need to have typed. Would you like a job? Would you like to do that? And she thought about it, and she said, I'll do it.
Wow.
It took her an entire year, her entire first year of high school.
Wow.
Every day she came home after school, and she typed that manuscript flawlessly. Wow. And that...
Well, congrats on her.
And it became a mother-daughter project like Margaret and Mary, And so one day I was halfway into the project, and I was in the research center standing at the desk, and this woman came in and she said, well, my great-grandmother was Mary Ronan, and I'm looking for information about her. And I couldn't believe it. And so I have become very good friends with the great-granddaughter. And the family was so supportive in the creation of this book. It was really, really
well, I would imagine
thing.
You've written a number of books, and I would imagine you don't always have family to support
what
you're
writing.
writing.
This was my second book. And it was really a challenge because I had to use everything I learned in graduate school about layering footnotes. It was difficult because Margaret had footnoted, and then Miriam had footnoted, and then I needed to footnote. So how do you deal with those layers? And so is what I learned in graduate school. So it turned out to be a very personal project because of my connection with Mary, the great-granddaughter. Her name was also Mary, and my own daughter. And really her story is like ripples in a pond. Everyone who reads it, it creates ripples for them.
Sure.
And those ripples continue. And I think, we can all be like Mary, really, if we leave our stories as a legacy to our families. Well, and everybody has a story.
That's the perfect place for me to ask this question. Can you tell us, maybe one or two or three highlights of her life and her story that were highlights
Well, I think, one of the things that I find really interesting, it's not just a straight reminiscence. There are lots of, as I said, there are lots of layers to the story. One of the things that I think is interesting for teachers and for me is that the Victorian perspective of Native Americans comes through there. And Peter Ronan was a good Indian agent, but, he was charged with converting the Indians to Catholicism. He was an Irish Catholic, and he was very, very, strong in that idea. And to see the process, the thought processes of Mary and her husband, and what they believed was the right thing to do, is appalling to us today.
Right.
And so I think that perspective is very telling.
Right.
And it's and it really helps us. I think have some empathy for people that we have maybe looked at as bad characters.
Right.
I recall that at one point, one of the great heroes of Mary's family was Thomas Francis Marr. Now, he is a very controversial figure. He was an Irish Catholic general who came here as the secretary of the territory, and he was quickly made acting governor because the governor was absent, and so he had a lot of power and he had a lot of political enemies. But Mary, he's a god to her, and she attends one of his lectures. They bring in $1,000, on this lecture, and she is so enthusiastic about it. I just think it's a very important perspective that we don't often get.
Yeah, and I bet you didn't expect it.
I didn't expect that at all, no.
Okay, we have about a minute left in this really fun show, Ellen, and I guess I have one more question for you. What do you think was the best lesson that you learned? Because this sounds like a great labor of love for you, and lots of wonderful things happened.
I think what I learned is that any project you take on will come to fruition if you, if you're really diligent about it. And in fact, this book did win a finalist award in the Willa Cather Literary Awards. And it's because it is a literary work of art. It should be one of the best 100 books of Montana.
And what do you think was the most important thing you learned from Mary?
I learned from Mary that, I'm sure she took skeletons in her closet to her grave. Her granddaughter, great-granddaughter, and I have talked about that. We'll never know what they were, but she was very...
How interesting.
Yeah, she was very open, but in a certain way, only told you what she wanted you to hear.
As most of us would feel.
Yeah.
Well, Ellen, it has just been a pleasure having you here again today to share so much of this really interesting information with us. And folks, like I said, don't ever forget about the Montana Historical Society. It's a great place to go and have some fun and learn. For Aging Horizons, I'm Kimmy Everman.
Special thanks to the Department of Public Health and Human Services for their continued support. Hosts on Aging Horizons are program specialists at the Montana Office on Aging. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions. For more information about Aging Horizons, call the Department of Public Health and Human Services toll-free 800-332-2272.